Welcome to the Techno Gals podcast, where we are two gals talking about technology and anything else that is top of mind. Let's get started. We recorded our first episode last week, and we watched it almost immediately afterwards. What were your initial reactions post-watching ourselves in our recording?
I watched it 3 times right afterwards.
I was doing the play-by-play by text.
Yeah, yeah. I was surprised how relaxed I thought we were. I was really nervous going into it and was worried that we would come across, or at least myself, disingenuine or not authentic and not really acting like myself, but I was pleasantly surprised that I was the weird, awkward Tracy that I normally am. So I guess that's a good thing. But yeah, it was really good. I thought.
That's
I don't
good.
know. I hope they like it.
Yeah, me too. I think my favorite part was when you were like, I'm pumped. But you were like so like monotone about it. I was like, there's Tracy.
Pretty much. Pretty
I'm
much my state
pumped.
of
And you were
mind.
like, I'm pumped.
Yeah, yeah. I guess so. My mom watched it, and I was telling you about this the other night. And my mom is the type of person that would be like, "Oh, that's not very good, guys. Like, you should probably re-record it or think about a different line of work." And just brutally honest. And she was watching it, and she was laughing at all the parts that I thought was somewhat comical. So that felt good. And then she would pause it and she'd be like, "Oh, I can totally relate to that. Oh, you guys know what you should do for the next episode? You need to add this topic." And then she would go down this rabbit hole. And I'm like, wow, you're like actually super engaged. And at the end, she watched the whole unedited clip of it.
Yeah.
And she was just really excited. I'm like, oh, well, that gives me even though it's your mom, you're still like, does it really count? But I feel
Yeah.
like her personality makes it still count. So I don't know. Now I feel like I'm really hyping this thing up and maybe no one likes it. We don't know.
That's okay. I mean, if it brings us joy, that's an immediate win.
Yes, agreed.
That's cool. So I think I mean, I know we chatted about it afterwards and definitely had some thoughts that came to mind as we record future episodes. Evidently, you and I are really bad at the use of and likes. So in this episode, I'm going to try to be mindful of why am I using the filler word and
Okay.
why am I trying to occupy that airtime or space with something other than like something more meaningful. So this is me being very conscious about use of the word and likes to explain my stories.
Man, you go, girl. Like, do you have it? I just did it. I said, like, we need an air horn every time we say a filler where I'm like,
Yeah.
"Whirr."
There should be some, I wonder if we can find some stats about like, I just did it too.
I know. I know. This is going to be really hard because when I really try to not say like is the one that I always go for. Although I did notice I said a few times already. And I was just getting ready to say it again. But when I think about not using those words, my brain locks up and I cannot speak. Saying this right now is hard to try to not say it.
I totally
weird.
get you. Yeah, for sure. Well, cool. So we have a couple of topics that I know we want to get to today. One is that post us watching our episode, we realized that we acknowledged that we work together at AWS, but we never really went into what our roles are and how we support our customers. So we kind of thought the tech piece of this episode would be just us going over our roles a little bit more in detail, the types of customer support and what does our team do to support our customers in their growth. So that's going to be our first topic, and then I'm saving the second one for later. So what do you think? Do you think do you want to go first? Do I want to go first? Who should? Our roles are similar. That's a good thing to point
Yeah.
out. We're very similar in roles, but they end up being nuanced and a little bit different just because of the type of customers we support.
Yeah. I don't know. Go ahead and kick us off and it'll just be a conversation and I'll fill in some spots and we'll go from there.
Okay, so this is how I usually describe it because anything in the cloud can be quite like ambiguous and and a little bit big and again nuanced. So I tend to say that I lead a team of cloud strategists, cloud transformation strategists that work with customers on their cloud adoption strategy. And this can be where we meet customers at any place in their adoption journey. So whether they are in their infancy and moving out of an on-prem location, and they could be brand new to the cloud, or they could be digitally native and retiring like digitally native tech debt. They could be re-architecting an application that's going to be modernized to be available in the cloud more successfully. So it's very different per every customer that we work with and helping them on their strategy. But these are usually long-term strategies. And most of the time when we think cloud technologists, we think, oh, they must be like super tech, like deep as far as like knowledge. And we are, I would say in general, like generalist. Like we know a little bit about all of the AWS services, and we're usually listening for how do we combine the business problem or how do we solve the business problem with a technology solution. So my team tends to combine the business acumen with technology.
Yep. A good analogy that we like to use internally is when we think about the account team, you have the primary members of an account team being the account executive, the CSM or the customer solutions manager, which is the team that we lead, and then the solutions architect. And if you think about it in business terms, your account executive is like the CEO. They own executive relationships. They're setting the vision for the account team. Your solutions architect is more sitting in that CTO office, really deep ingrained in the technology and setting strategy for reference architecture and North Stars. Your CSM is tying back business outcomes and technology implementation and acting almost as the CIO or the COO of the account team. And I think that's a unique characteristic of the CSMs on our team is they have that ability to look through the chaos and identify root cause and what is the customer really trying to do? Is it to bring in net new revenue? Is it to solve some really challenging business problem within their industry? And then we're able to see, okay, based on our AWS tool belt of services and mechanisms and engagements, how do we pull in those right things to make them successful on the technology side?
For sure. What do you think is the biggest? So we have the exact, very similar titles. We just support different segments. So I support customers that are independent software vendors, typically working with B2B. So providing end solutions to another business that's going to use them within inside their environment. Whereas you work in our enterprise section, and more specifically within the, well, you just moved to a new segment.
Retail and CPG.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of sub verticals under there, but the ones that I'm responsible for are, there's a few. E-commerce, consumer packaged goods, retail technology, health, beauty, grocery, drug, and convenience. There's a lot of
Yeah,
those.
that is quite a few. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mine's a
There's
little
some
bit
cool
cleaner.
customers.
It's data and analytics and Gen AI customers. And I think there's
That's
some
pretty
storage
sweet.
customers too. Yeah. So I wouldn't say cleaner, but maybe not quite as many underneath my section that I support.
Not as much of a mouthful.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I support ISVs and you support the retail and CPG side of our enterprise customers. What do you think is the biggest difference between our roles, even though they're the same role but for different customer segments?
I'll try to answer this, but I don't have a ton of experience with ISV customers, but what I would expect to be the biggest difference is retail CPG customers, they have a lot of brick and mortar type stores and they have these really legacy enterprise infrastructure. So the things that we work on with our customers is really around what's your data center strategy? Do you want to get out of your data center? We obviously want you to. We want you to come to AWS. But then apart from that, how do we help modernize some of those really old stacks, whether it's mainframe or just really, really outdated versions of SAP, which introduces, challenges on its own. I would say I heard something interesting actually yesterday at work. Someone was talking about ISV customers, and I had never really thought about it like this, but one thing that I think that's interesting in your space is your customers are also our partners.
Yeah.
Like that That's kind of trippy.
I know, I think about that all the time too. And I think this is one of the really awesome things that I appreciate about AWS's culture is that we really center on being customer obsessed and customer focused. So we don't necessarily just push AWS as a solution. If a partner can deliver it and it's going to be the better fit for the customer that we're trying to support, if that advances their adoption, if that accelerates their growth, that's the right thing for us to recommend. And I do love that
Yep.
we have the freedom and empowerment to make the right choice and be the trusted advisor and strategic advisor to our customer, as opposed to feeling like we have a bias and, hey, we're going to position AWS every time. Because that's just not the case. There are a lot of partners that we work with that are in my space
Yeah.
that can offer solutions that might be better for the customer in some regards.
Yep. 100%. One other thing that is actually kind of a big difference is with retail CPG customers, we're often in a lot of times of this compete situation because they view Amazon.com as a competitor. So there's some mental model shifts around AWS and Amazon.com being two completely separate lines of businesses, and Amazon.com actually being a customer of AWS. And they do that intentionally. I think that was something kind of hard for me to wrap my head around, but that can be kind of challenging too.
Yeah, that makes sense. I hadn't even really thought about that, but I definitely know. I mean, there's obviously like customers that have similar space, and we sometimes support both of those customers that are fulfilling different or the same market demand and market needs.
Yeah.
And I often feel like we're trying to balance that unbiased point of view from knowing that we have information from customers that are in similar segments or similar
Yep.
demand for the market.
Yeah, and I think I could probably say this. We'll edit it out if I can't. But one thing too that I always like to use with the customer, and you have to be in a good spot where you've earned trust too. But the CSM role is not commission based. And so we are really get to be this unbiased opinion on here are the services and mechanisms and partners and technologies that are even sit outside of AWS that you can use, because it's like no skin off our back. We're just like, if you use it, great, it's in your best interest. That's our perspective. But we're not taking home a paycheck where we're getting additional incentive if you do use one service over the other, which it actually takes a lot of pressure off the role, for us to really just be able to look at the entire landscape and recommend truly what we think is the best approach.
I totally agree with you. It's my favorite. I don't want to say my favorite. It's one of my top favorite parts of the role is that we are non-attainment, non-variable comp
Yeah.
structured. We are just truly incentivized to do what's right for the customer at any given point in time. And I love that
Yep.
about it. Okay, so your answer was a little different than what I thought you were going to say. So that's great that I asked you first. So when
Oh
I asked
gosh.
you, what do you think is the biggest difference? Is
Yeah.
and you said that you have more brick and mortar, which is very true. I hadn't really thought about that either because I'm predominantly working with companies that are SaaS, which is like software as a solution. Maybe back in the day, they used to send the CDs, and that would be installed in someone's own personal environment. But and that still happens. I think maybe not CDs, but they are still like definitely like versions that are within
Floppies.
independent, yeah, environments. But so I don't really have like for the most part any brick and mortar things to consider, or inventory or supply chain
Supply
demand or
chain.
anything of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have any of that I consider. But I was thinking migrations. So our
Oh yeah.
businesses are very different in that you work with your customer base historically. I'm going to speak from 2023 terms since 2024 just recently started.
Yeah.
Does a lot of migration work, and mine ISVs were more predominantly to already be in the cloud or operating fully in the cloud, and so we're working on less migration and more modernization goals for my customers.
Yep, a lot of migration on my side. And I think that's part of the kind of like characteristics of the role too. Is inherently CSMs are really good at program management, and that's the skill that you have to have for the program or for the migration side of the house of identifying roadblocks, understanding wave planning, total cost of ownership analysis, and all of that good stuff. Migrations are good. Are they the most exciting thing? Sometimes they are, but sometimes a lot of times, it's a playbook. You want to get out of the data center. There's these things that you got to do, and we help them get there. But
Okay, so that's great that you mentioned that because I think it's really important to highlight that a lot of I mentioned that it's not just technology. Like we provide the business acumen part of like combining why to use the technology solution to solve the business problem. But the other piece of this is that, and a lot of times our role is not strictly like, well, here's how you physically migrate something, or here are the
Right.
steps to migrate something, but it's the people and the process change that happens that hasn't been, that's a much larger iceberg than just the physical migration. So,
Yeah.
and maybe we should take one step back, and I'm going to throw you a question here, which is in case people don't know why someone would want to leave an on prem environment, why would a customer find that to be beneficial or advantageous to move out of an on prem to the cloud?
Oh man, there's a lot of different reasons. I would say most of the time enterprises it's a business decision, so maybe they're having some failing systems and they're looking at, wow, all of my hardware within the data center is becoming end of life. Am I willing to make that investment to upgrade all of my hardware? Or their lease is coming up for their data center. Are they willing to re-up their lease for another 5, or plus years? Which then in turn might mean an additional hardware upgrade within the data center. But it's always a business decision. There has to be some sort of impact that the systems being housed in the data center are experiencing some type of turmoil. I don't know if that's the right word, to start the conversation. But once you kind of wrap your head around what's the root cause, why are you even considering a move to the cloud, then you can start looking at all of these ancillary reasons around using only what you paying for
Need.
only what you use. Yeah. And then the business agility side, a lot of the ability to experiment and quickly test and proof of concept new ideas. You're just not going to get that in a traditional data center. So there's a bunch of different factors that usually like the CIO and CIO, CFO, CEO will look at, but when they start to make that decision. What do
Yeah,
you
for
think?
sure.
You
For
probably
sure.
have
You did a
something
great
more
job.
eloquent. Okay.
Yeah, no, I loved it. I loved it. I was waiting to throw in some business agility because I feel like that's one of the other, there's obviously the cost piece, and a lot of folks don't know that if you're new to tech or you're not super familiar with the space, one of the, like when someone's trying to buy physical hardware and servers to live in an environment, a data center, you have to predict future usage. So I think, oh, we're going to grow at this rate, which means our compute needs are going to grow, our storage needs are going to grow, and you are trying to predict, but you're also purchasing that up front, and you don't know
Yep.
if it's right. So I think that's a huge one. But the other one is the business agility, being able to quickly do release updates, anything of that nature that's DevOps related is a huge part of it. And the other part that I think is becoming more common is talent acquisition. We're seeing as we have shifts in demand of talent that a lot of folks are not trained for prem environments anymore, on-prem environments. So we want to be able to put them in a space, or they're hiring for folks that are in the cloud, and they don't find that to be as cutting edge as it is in the cloud. And so there's also this change of like, well, hey, we want to make for sure we can keep recruiting and hiring top talent,
Yep.
and that may be that we need to be partially in the cloud or some hybrid type environment.
Yeah, and we're probably going down a rabbit hole here, but one other thing that I think is really interesting in the ways of the cloud now is back you were talking about procuring hardware and servers. Back in the day, you had to submit a request. It's usually to your procurement team. You're filling out this giant form, anticipating all the needs that you just kind of talked about, Alicia. And then you're waiting 6 to 8 weeks to get that and for it to be provisioned and before you can even use it. So when you're
Right.
thinking about a planning cycle of upgrading hardware, implementing a new business application, your planning cycles are a lot longer and you're having to make all of these decisions up front rather than taking a more agile approach and saying, okay, we can always change the hardware, we can always change some of the technology, and we might need to go get this skill set to implement things like that. With now, all of that is on demand, which is really cool, but it also introduces a lot of other really interesting challenges of, ooh, now my developer can go spin up this giant instance for a test environment, and then he can forget about it, or she can forget about it, and then we're like, oh crap, we're spending all of this money. So not only are you're getting some really good trade-offs, but you also, I think it highlights the importance of, you cannot operate in the same mental model of being on-prem as you can in the cloud, because your costs will just go out of control, and
sure.
potential some really big security risks too.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think that the other part, the reason why I was bringing up talent and acquisition or retention, was that part of our process as we migrate, it's not just the physical migration, but it is making sure that we upskill and train
Yeah.
the existing talent workforce and the talent force of that company to be successful in the cloud as well. And that's a process. To learn the cloud, if it's brand new, is going to take a moment. It's not a snap of a fingers or something that happens
Yep.
overnight. And to your point, it's a different mental model of how you operate successfully in the cloud. That takes time. So it's not just like a simple, oh, we know how to migrate. Yeah, there's just a lot of people. The iceberg is bigger, and that's an important part to
Yeah.
remember.
Yep. Good call.
All right. Well, is there anything else you want to highlight about our roles?
I don't think so. Maybe just one last thing. So I just said, one of the cool things about our role in the segment that we work in is we get to work with house brand names, extremely large customers. And you and I have talked a little bit about this in the past, is when you're working with them, you, in some form or fashion, you get to see your fingerprints on all of the stuff that you did with them. And then, you have this product in your home, or you're buying this service or subscription or whatever it may be, and you're like, oh, I helped do X, Y, and Z. And even though it's completely on the back end, sometimes it's maybe a little bit more forward facing. I just think that's really cool, is you really get to see the fruits of your labor just in your own everyday life, because these customers are so visible within the market. That's the last
Yeah,
thing I'll say
so
about it.
we were chatting about this, which is, I'm glad you brought this up again, because when we saw each other in person, I think it was the first time we saw each other in person,
Yeah.
and we were meeting up for a workshop. I was talking about a customer that I was working with, and you were like, "I just bought something from them,"
Yep.
and I was like, "That's
And
awesome."
it was some clothing, and I packed them and wore them at the workshop. I'm like,
Yeah,
these are the pants.
yeah, yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
So yeah, that's super awesome. I love that there's some apps that I use, and I'm like, every time I use this, I'm like, I know what it's doing.
Yeah, right. Yep.
That's cool.
100%.
All right, so I'm going to take a quick coffee break here and dump some coffee, and I don't know how much of this is going to come across on the mic. So I was waiting
Ooh,
for this very
it
moment
sounds cool.
as we segment into the non-tech section of our podcast.
Okay.
Oh, and I'm so happy that I got a full cup. It was getting cold. It was towards the bottom.
Yeah, mine is cold. I'm gonna need a refill soon.
That's good. Happiness there. Okay, so the other topic I wanted to bring up today, because we're in January, is
Yes.
dry January, and that a lot of people do
Ooh.
this trend of either reducing or eliminating alcohol use in the month of January. And I think oftentimes it's probably because we just drink so much around the holidays. There's so many like parties and gatherings, and you have a glass of wine or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But wanted to talk to you about if you're doing dry January, and how is it going if you are, and what are your thoughts about dry January?
This is a setup. Oh,
Very
dry
well.
January. So I was doing dry January. What day is it? The ninth.
January 9th.
Ugh. Ugh. So in general, I would say the last like 6 months, I've extremely like reduced the amount of alcohol intake. That makes it sound like I drink a lot. I don't. But a glass of wine with dinner. And then, Friday after work, going and having dinner and having a couple drinks and coming home and stuff like that. So within the last 6 months, I've just started to decrease quite a bit. I try to avoid it during the week. I've actually felt a lot better. We've started experimenting with all these like we call them nah beers for NA, like, hey, you want a nah
Yeah.
beer? And it's also been really interesting when we go out to ask, like, hey, what are your options for non-alcoholic beer, and kind of seeing the, the differences there. But as far as dry January, I'm like, oh, I'll just do dry January. I'm already kind of in this like mindset of decreasing. And then Friday rolled around and I went out to dinner and they had this really delicious looking cherry old fashioned. And you got multiple pictures of it sent to you. And
So that's like a
I
spoiler
just,
alert. I already knew she broke dry January.
yeah, that's why I'm like, set up. Yeah, so I was going to do it. I'm not doing it now. In general, I'm just decreasing the overall intake. But there's a lot there, like the psychology around, like, oh, it's just 1 month, like, why on this Friday did you go and you said you weren't going to do it and then you did it, and all of these things. It'd be interesting. Yeah, what's your take on that? How is dry January going for you, ma'am?
Oh, I renamed it. I renamed it to
Oh,
Damp January. Damp.
I love that. That's going to be a hashtag for this episode. Hashtag damp
Damp
January.
January.
Oh
Yeah,
my God,
so
that's good.
I'm like you. So okay, and we also mentioned in the last episode that we have a lot of similarities about ourselves, which is probably why we were like, a magnet for each other, and we knew that this was
Yeah.
gonna be a great friendship and coworkership. But I tend to identify like as an introvert. So networking events, not really my forte, not my strength. I don't love to go up and have, hey, what's your job? What do you do? Those types of conversations like 20 times in a night or even more than that. But I do love deep, like rich conversation. So if that's why I say I'm like an introverted extrovert. Like I can have a lot of conversation if it feels really meaningful and like it's really heartfelt and genuine. But like those surface level, like networking questions never really translate to me as filling back up my bucket. So I tend to avoid a lot of networking events, which is also why I'm trying to be better in 2024 about it. Like I just got to push myself past it. But I think that I've historically drank in the past. If I was gonna like, if I'm at a networking event, I want to have like a little drink, and it'll kind of help me feel like more willing to have that conversation, or more willing to put myself out in that space of what I think is just not organic for me or discomfort. And then, so my January, I feel like has turned into like mindful consumption. Like, why are you drinking today? And if you're at a networking event, which I haven't been to a networking event, but I'm going to ask myself, like, do you really truly need this drink to feel more comfortable or more at ease, or can you actually do it without it? And so
Yeah.
when I say damp, it's like I'm having a couple of drinks here or there, but it's definitely like significantly reduced from like December around the holidays and so forth. But then
Yeah.
also just like, why are you having that glass of wine, or why are you having a drink on a Friday? So I'm calling it damp.
I
I always like
love
to give
it.
myself a little bit of grace. But
You're so insightful and cool. Gosh.
but we've talked about this before with just us being introverted. Do you feel like you've used alcohol to kind of like help you feel like you've also admitted, we both admitted we're kind of awkward people. Do you feel like it helps in that space? And like how have you noticed a change or anything of that nature for you as you've done this like 6 month kind of greatly reduced?
Yeah. I would like to think it helps me be less awkward and weird when I'm talking to people. At least that's what I tell myself. I think it's also something about we have such a drinking culture.
For sure.
My husband and I were talking about this one time, and everything that we do. So we live on a lake and we have a little pontoon boat, and go fishing and go hang out. And it's like, you want to go for a boat ride? Oh, let's make a quick drink,
Yeah.
or let's go out to dinner and then you have drinks, or we're gonna invite the neighbors over to play cards and we'll have a couple drinks. And it's just like this weird thing of like, I don't know. I don't really know how I feel about it. But I guess to answer your question, in those social scenarios, especially like networking events and things like that, having something physically in your hand, one, to show that you're participating in this kind of like social culture, one, makes me feel better, because if you're holding a water bottle, or if you don't have anything, then I'm like, ugh, What do I do with my
With my
hands?
hands, you're like Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, like I don't know what to do. And then the other side of it is, obviously you get a buzz from alcohol, and so it reduces some of those inhibitions and kind of stressors of being the first one to start a conversation or to really engage to have the meaningful conversation. I agree. The ones where you're just like meeting a million different people, like that is just so exhausting to me. But if you find that, those few people where you're really engaged in conversation and having those inhibitions reduced just a little bit to ask maybe some questions where you're feeling a little bit more comfortable in your own skin and stuff like that, I think is why I would do it in those scenarios. But when we first met at that workshop that we were talking about, I wasn't drinking, and I ended up ordering a mocktail several times. But it was more so like once I had it in my hand and it looked like a drink, I was like totally fine. Like it
Yeah,
wasn't
for
even
sure.
a thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know. There's a lot that goes into it. And then if you potentially drink too much and then you have the anxiety the next morning, the hangover, like I'm just such a wuss about that stuff, and I just want to lay in bed and watch Lord of the Rings with my dogs all day. And so that's not
Yeah,
like a super productive weekend. So
for sure.
damn
That's
January.
also,
Love it.
yeah, for sure. And I've been, I guess, consistently reducing alcohol intake for a while now, since probably we chatted in Nashville, and I had mentioned
Yeah.
that I was
Oh
also
yeah.
kind of in a similar boat. It's just, I can't, I'm getting older. I mean, like, let's just call a spade a spade. I'm getting older, and not like I was in college, and I just can't spring out of bed the next day and just go and be a completely functioning person. And so I just, like, especially during the work week, I try to avoid alcohol. I don't want to wake up in a bad space. I need my sleep, I've realized, and maybe that's an age thing or a maturity thing, I don't know. But I need my sleep, and I'm just a better functioning person without it in
Yep.
general.
Nothing to add. I totally agree. It's a weird conundrum of life with the drinking culture. I wonder if it's similar, outside of the United States, or if this is something that, this constant party scene and drinking culture is just way more prevalent here, or if it's similar other places, but it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, for sure. No, I totally agree. Well,
When you
that's
have to name a
cool.
whole month after it to
Yeah,
be mindful of your drinking intake, there's probably some things going on. I mean, where did that even come from?
I
Just one,
think again, I
just one.
think it's people come off the holidays. You end up like back to it's New Year's Eve, it's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Christmas Eve, it's Christmas
I'm gonna
Day, and they get
reset.
together as
I'm
family.
resetting.
Yeah, it's a reset. So there's no shame if you need to give it some funny, or not funny, but unique name to kind of help you be
Yeah.
mindful of it. But I'm curious if just had a little bug fly across me. Evidence that we record in our homes, I suppose. I don't know. So I live in a state and we've had a bunch of
Oh
snow
my
this
god.
week. And then we've had probably like 8 inches or so. So maybe all the bug is trying to move inside so it can have a better life than be outside.
We just got like 3 inches of snow last night, so it's coming here too.
Yeah, yours is not, I mean, quite as bad. We were drifted over this morning.
Oh,
So, yeah, because like the garage doors and like doors. So you open like the front door and just there was a pile of snow as like a
oh my
snowball. And it's like, oh
gosh.
no. So my day's been a little bit like
Snow
Murphy's
day.
Law, where it's all kind of like compounding like one problem after the other, but it's all right. We're getting through it.
Did you go to the gym this morning?
Oh
Could
gosh,
you
why?
even get out? No,
Yeah, I
I'm
didn't
not
go.
shaming you, but I was gonna say, like, there's no way you could have got out, right?
So yeah, I tried to go to the gym at 6 in the morning, and it was still dark out, and the drifts were there, and I was like, I just don't. This is not what I want to do with
Oh
my
yeah,
day,
warm
and
bed.
yeah, and I was like, I don't want to sit here and have to shovel this and then go work out and then come home and my day. I was like, I just don't need to add that to my day.
I totally get it. So I'll just share the embarrassing picture I sent you this morning, which is we were talking about like we're doing this in the morning, pretty early for us, and we agreed on a time, but we both needed just a little bit more time. And Alicia's like, "Hey, I'm just gonna need a couple more minutes." I'm like, "Yeah, me too." Like, what? That was supposed to be like 5 minutes before we were gonna record. It's like This is the I guess the good part about being a girl is when your hair's so greasy, you can do like slicked back bun and put
Oh
some lip
yeah.
gloss on, and you're like, oh, I meant for my hair to be
Yeah.
greasy and unwashed. It's fine.
Yeah.
So
Mine's, I mean, with the snow in mine, it's kind of fallen, but
it
it's
still
all right.
looks good.
So I got a new plan. The new plan
Okay.
is the 5:30 workout class. So we'll see if we can make it at 5:30. I'm hoping then like the roads will be clearer too, because it was just a lot of
Oh,
overnight stay.
5:30 tonight.
Yeah,
Okay. I
5:30
thought you
tonight
meant
in
you were gonna try
Mobile.
to go at 5:30 tomorrow morning. I'm like,
No, no,
that's
just
sounds
not.
worse than the 6 a.m.
I really respect every one of those people that can get there. It's just that's just not who I am. I'm a night
Yeah,
owl. I love to stay up late.
I like warm bed. I like to go to bed early and sleep in, so I don't it's just overall just real weird over here.
Well, that's awesome. Well, those are the topics we have for today.
Yeah,
Is there anything else that you think is you'd like to add?
I don't think so. This was a great way to start the day, and I'm a fan of morning recordings because now I'm pumped to get the day started. And I realized I
I
said pumped,
know.
and you were making fun of me for saying pumped earlier, but it was
Are you
like
like
an
pumped?
excitement pump. Yeah, I'm super pumped, even though my facial expression doesn't show it.
I think that's maybe we should say like we were recording these on the weekends, which is great. But
Yeah,
then I said, hey, we both enjoy it. We enjoy chatting with each other organically, like it's just a normal part of our
right.
day. So I'm like, why wouldn't we just start our day off with something pleasant, and then that momentum carries us through the rest of our day. And she's like,
Yes,
love it. So yeah, we're now recording in the mornings,
pumped.
so we can take this happiness and smiles and giggles
Yeah, yeah.
into into our workday and hopefully spread it around, spread some cheer around.
Yep. Love it.
Awesome. Well, I guess that went pretty good. So we'll cue that outro music.